Okay, so quadratic equations. How do we solve these things? Well, there's a couple different types of quadratics, and we'll start with the simplest, which is square roots. Right? So x squared equals 9. How do you solve that? Well, you take the square root of both sides. And what do you get? Well, x squared, square root of that, that's just x. Square root of 9, there's two options, plus or minus 3, because 3 squared is 9, but also minus 3 times minus 3, a negative times a negative, will get you a positive 9. So square roots always have two answers. So there's two of them, a plus and a minus. Okay, and, oops, we'll just slide that up a little bit. We can do a little bit more complicated versions, right? If you have x plus 3, quantity squared equals 17, what's x equal to? Well, take the square root of both sides. X plus 3, quantity squared equals square root of 17. You need a plus or minus there, and this is just x plus 3. And so we have x is, by moving the 3 over to the other side, minus 3 plus or minus square root of 17. Again, quadratics will often, not always, but often, give you two answers because of the plus or minus on the square root. What if it's not something squared? And here there's actually three things you can do. You can factor, you can complete the square, or you can use a quadratic equation. And here we'll do factoring, and we know how to do that because we spent some time doing that last week. So suppose we want to solve 14x squared plus 19x equals 3. Right? It's an x squared, right? So it's a quadratic. In solving these things, there's a rule that you always have to follow if you're going to do factoring or completing the square or the quadratic equation. Always set one side equal to 0. So 14x squared plus 19x minus 3 equals 0. And we'll see why we need to set one side equal to 0 in just a minute or two. But let's factor this. Factor that thing. So 14 times minus 3, multiply the first times the last, and you get minus 42. So what do we need? We need two numbers that multiply together to give minus 42, add together to give 19. So we need two numbers multiply. I should have written this down while I was talking earlier, to give minus 42. But what do we know about the two numbers? Well, if you get a negative, that means you need a positive number and you need a negative number. Add to give plus 19. What does that mean? These are arrows. The positive number has to be bigger than the negative number, right? If you add two numbers together, one positive, one negative, and you get a positive number, then the positive number has to be bigger. So my two numbers are 21 and negative 2. 21 minus 2, that equals 19. And 21 times minus 2 equals minus 42. Great. So 14x squared plus 19x minus 3 equals 0. We can break up that 19 into a 21 minus 2. 14x squared plus 21x minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Well, actually that doesn't work, right? Because you can't factor anything out of this. And that's what we're looking for. But that's easily remedied. We'll just switch the 21x and the minus 2x. And now we can factor, right? I can factor 2x out of these two, leaving with a 7x minus 1. And I factor a 3 out of these two, leaving me with a 3 times 7x minus 1. And that's what I'm looking for. Now I can factor out the 7x minus 1s. And so we have 2x, that's an x, plus 3 times 7x minus 1 equals 0. And this is why we want it equal to 0. Remember, this is a problem from section A.1 actually. If u times v equals 0, either u equals 0 or v equals 0. This is a magic property of the number of 0. Right? No other number has this property. If u times v equals 1, right, you don't know anything about u or v. But what we do know about two numbers multiplied equal to give me 0 is that one of them has to be 0. So either 2x plus 3 equals 0 or 7x minus 1 equals 0. So either x equals, well, we solve this, move the minus 3 over and then divide by 2, or x equals, move the minus 1 over, then it comes over as a plus 1, and then divide by 7. And so there's our answer that we get by factoring. Great. So these two numbers, one way people call these is call them roots. The solutions to a quadratic equation are also called the roots. As we'll also see in chapter 2, they're also called x-intercepts. So if you know a root, you can figure out one of the factors, right? So we know x equals minus 3 halves is a root. So 2x equals minus 3, or 2x plus 3 equals 0. So 2x plus 3 is a factor. Right? So if you take the equation for a root and get 0 on one side, right, you get one of the factors. So if you know the roots, you can figure out the factors. If you know the factors, you can figure out the roots. Okay, so solving quadratic equations by factoring, you just factor it and then set each piece of the factorization equal to 0 and try and solve it. That's one of the ways to solve quadratic equations. Like I said, quadratic equation, the quadratic formula, and completing the square are two other ways. We'll do completing the square in chapter 2, but the next thing we need to look at is the quadratic equation, and that will be in the next video.